Throughout history, there have been countless unexplainable stories, events, and moments captured on audio. These horrifying tapes were archived, never to be heard again. Until now. These are the tapes of trepidation. Tape number 58. Funeral homes aren't exactly what you think they are.
The reality is that if you were reading this, then likely it's too late already. The cat's out of the bag, and the human population of our entire planet is in a tailspin over the truth I've decided to share. But just in case we survive tonight, I still feel it's time the truth is found out, before this potential storm happens again. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Frederick Melvin, and I come from a long line of funeral home directors in Wisconsin. In fact, the very building I still preside over was constructed by my great-great-grandfather in 1922. If you think about it, you'll often notice that funeral homes are most often a family business. Let me assure you that this is in no way a coincidence, or simply because the kids could never launch off from the nest. The truth is far more grave than that. Pun sort of intended. Let me explain. If you've read any archaeological magazines or online articles, you've likely seen some of the strange graves that have been discovered with steel cages and locks on them. Or perhaps, you've seen exhumed 16th century bodies with rocks crammed into their jaws, in a manner that leaves them useless if one were to suppose the being were still living. The reality is that these acts were perpetrated by those in my vocation, and for good reason. You see, most people believe that the job of those who prepare the bodies of the deceased is to simply pump them full of a formaldehyde substitute and sell the families an overpriced casket. Yes, that is generally the case on a day-to-day basis, but our true purpose dates back thousands of years. Our true calling is to protect the living from the aftermath of what death does to some beings when they pass. Those cages I mentioned earlier, they were legitimately intended to keep the dead right where they were in case the unrefined procedures that needed to take place weren't performed correctly, as was the large stones in the jaws. They say there is a little truth in all fairy tales, and I'm here to tell you that's an absolute certainty. Vampires, zombies, werewolves, and even skinwalkers are all very real. Please stick with me here as I explain as quickly as I can. These beings once walked in large numbers among the general population. In fact, many of history's darkest eras were a product of these beings wreaking havoc on certain societies. There's many theories about their origination, but as a professional, all I know is that the numbers and the bloodlines of these beings have diminished as time has passed over the centuries. Many people walking around today would never know it, but they just might be the great-grandson of a bloodsucker that terrorized London in the 30s. Or their uncle might have been responsible for the increase in bear attacks in northern states decades ago. While these beings do still fully exist and terrorize our world, their frequency and power has diminished greatly today. But unfortunately, their blood is powerful, and oftentimes lies dormant in your average person. And that's where I and others of my profession come into play. We are the guards of the grave, a society whose sole purpose is to oversee and monitor the decomposition of every human that passes. Because sometimes, those strong genetics break through in the process of death, and the being becomes fully converted towards that faint strain. In other words, vampires especially are a very real threat to our society, and my job is to guarantee a stake to the heart or a decapitation at the first sign of the bloodline attempting to resurface in a past individual. You ever notice the large upswing in cremations? That's by no mistake. The reality is we've been experiencing a larger volume of these outbreaks after death, so much so to the point that a cremation eliminates a lot of sleepless nights and a low staffing that simply can't monitor all of the corpses as they settle. There was a time when our secret society had a universal record system that traced and identified the family lines that possessed these dormant genes, but the newest outbreak has defied even our records. We are now finding ourselves chasing werewolves down Main Street in the middle of the night with tungsten bullets, because Farmer Joe, who never had a trace in his bloodline, escaped his casket before his visitation the next morning. By the way, the silver thing is a facade. It's all about the hardness of the alloy. Last week, I took a shovel to the back of the head of Mrs. Greer, who had my cousin cornered in the embalming room and was attempting to mindlessly devour him. We cannot explain this upswing. Some suspect that something in our atmosphere, or in the food we eat, or even in the prescribed medicines we take, is mutating or even adding these genetic markers to our DNA. Others suspect it's more likely that most all of these genes might truly be possessed in all humans, and these environmental factors are simply setting them off. All I know is that thousands of years of research and practice has been found useless in the last few years, as everything has been defying the odds. Another factor is the timeline. Ever notice that when great diseases or wars affect our world, that oftentimes you'll see great care taken in the mass gathering of the dead? This is because we often have 72 to 96 hours before we even see the effects of these awakenings. But in the last year alone, we've witnessed the undead rise within 24 and even 12 hours after death. To put it truthfully, we are all exhausted, understaffed, and fearful that our world will soon see another era of darkness if these beings rise amidst the populace again. This brings us to the last 2 days. On Friday evening, a young lady who had passed from an unfortunate wreck was brought in. Her ancestry showed nothing in our records, and we had experienced a high volume of deceased this past week, so the special area we keep the suspected undead was completely filled. So, we placed her in the general cool storage area. I was in the middle of cremating a suspected vampire this evening, Saturday, when our in-house alarm system sounded. I sealed the chamber, grabbed my 10mm pistol, and ran towards the shouts of my cousin Tim yet again. Except this time, I didn't make it in time. And what I discovered defied everything I thought I knew. The young girl was crouched over what remained of my cousin, and had half transformed into a canine-like creature, only she was still standing on 2 feet, and as she turned to look at me, she revealed the largest fangs I've ever seen. She was a hybrid. I immediately fired shots and felt that they all found their mark, but they barely seemed to faze her as I retreated towards the steel doors to the storage area and initiated the lockdown system we had in place. I contacted my 2 remaining family members in the business and saw to it that the rest of the building was clear. That's when I heard more noises coming from that separate area we kept the more certain genetically marked deceased. Like I said, we had had an influx of deaths in our small town this week, and although I hadn't allowed one body to be unattended for more than 48 hours, as soon as I arrived in our security and panic room, live footage revealed that 3 of the 5 remaining had awoken already. 2 appeared to be your average flesh eaters, but the third was also some type of hybrid flesh eater who also possessed fangs. I watched in horror as they fed on the other 2 corpses, with the fanged being taking a dominant stance among them and exhibiting a strength like I had never witnessed in these beings as it began ripping door after door off of the storage drawers. That's when I decided to alert the central agency of what was happening here and call for backup. It took several minutes before I finally received an answer from a nearby town guard who themselves had just battled 4 beings and was currently chasing another hybrid he claimed could fly through a rural cornfield. Within minutes after that, it became apparent on the Central Communication Forum that countless funeral homes were under siege and over their heads. I decided the only thing left for me to do was to completely lock down the entire facility and let my father and uncle, the other 2 employees, know that they needed to look for help anywhere they could while I dealt with the inside. I was still confident that I could contain the outbreak within the facility if I had enough time to strategize and pick my opportunities to dispatch these beings. All of those ideas went out the door 5 minutes ago when I saw a figure approach the door in the general storage area in the form of a bear before instantly transforming back into a humanoid. There stood my cousin Tim, already awakened, and he was punching in the door code. A couple of minutes later, the special storage code was entered and the door locks released. And now, the doors to my panic room are being rammed over and over by several creatures, I suspect. I don't believe the locks will hold much longer. Run while you can.
This has been tape number 58. Funeral Homes Aren't Exactly What You Think They Are, by the Tapes of Trepidation Horror Narration Podcast. Funeral Homes Aren't Exactly What You Think They Are was written by Ethan Corday. Sorry if I'm butchering that, Ethan. And it was originally posted on Reddit No Sleep, and is narrated with author's permission. Guest narration, dialogue editing, and additional production for this episode was provided by Fayden. Be sure to check out Kay's fantastic YouTube channel, PolterKaist, for more killer narrations. A link can be found in the show notes. Kay is a new friend of the show and has been a huge supporter since we linked up over our mutual appreciation for wrestling and wrestling creepypastas. I appreciate you lending your voice to the podcast and all your support, Kay. Executive production and sound design for this episode was by TJ Hodder. Music for this episode was provided by Zero. Check out Zero's fantastic YouTube channel through the link tree in the show notes. Any additional credits for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Tapes of Trepidation theme was written by the incredible J.M. Scherf. The Tapes of Trepidation logo, overlays, banners, and all graphic design work was provided by the talented Jason Reese from Jaybird Digital Arts. If you have a story you would like to submit or a question regarding the show, please contact us at tapesoftrepidation@gmail.com. Support the show by subscribing and leaving a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcatcher, or like and subscribe on YouTube. Subscribes and ratings really help the show grow. But also, be sure to tell your friends. Word of mouth is also very helpful to a podcast like this one. Check us out on social media through the link tree in the show notes. We have Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Insert generic, hey, come join the Discord community, we're awesome, here. But seriously, I have a wonderful Discord community. And if you use Discord and you're not on it and you enjoy the podcast, you gotta come be a part of it. And if you'd like to support the show a little more, consider joining the Tapes of Trepidation Patreon. With for as little as $5 a month, you can gain access to monthly bonus short story narrations, the weekly behind-the-scenes podcast Within the Archive, and more. There is currently over 100 unique bonus episodes just for Patreon, when combining Within the Archive and the bonus short story narrations, all of which you can gain instant access to for $5 a month. I'm really proud of the amount of content I have to offer, and there's lots more coming. So come, join us, and become trapped within the archive. Just like my current patrons, Neil Skarupa of Neurotic Voice, Doozer Pindan, Ronan Kumori, Eric Phones, Patrick Stewart, and Madam Strangeways. Thank you all so much for the support. All content used on Tapes of Trepidation is either original, used with permission, or is available on your Creative Commons share-alike license. All rights reserved unless otherwise stated. Licensing information can be found in the show notes. This podcast and its content may not be redistributed or rebroadcasted without the express written consent of Tapes of Trepidation and the story's author. Thank you so much for listening.